Let's begin exiting the A.S.A.P lane with Alan.
Okay, hello everyone. Now, this is Alan Spielman, and what an interesting and fascinating show we have today. You are enough. Now, in these stressful times when many of us think we are not enough for whatever reason, what an inspiring message to hear, what a reassuring message to hear. And my guest today, Penni Zelinkoff, is the Chief Executive Officer and the host of the highly popular PenniZ Show. And she focuses on the most important self-help topic of all, KOing that bully in our mind who is constantly saying to us things like, you can't do that, you don't have the ability for that, or you don't have the experience, you're too young, you're too old, and the list goes on and on and on, and we've all heard it. And that voice actually has an almost endless list of self-limiting beliefs that get hardwired into our heads and can frankly cripple us for life if not confronted head on. And what a personal story that Penni has, and an inspiring one. After her own epiphany, what we might call her own eureka moment, she realized that her success as a real estate fixer-upper, focusing on the rehabilitation of residential properties, was rewarding her handsomely financially, but she was feeling the tug of a higher calling, and that being the rehabilitation of personal lives, and more specifically, these self-limiting beliefs that prevent so many of us from leading lives of purpose and meaning. You remember that Thoreau in his iconic classic On Walden Pond said that most men, and we could add women to that, lead lives of quiet desperation and die with their song inside them. So Penni, the slogan of your own show is that we activate personal transformation in people whose goal is to play on a bigger stage and become the very best version of themselves. That is a great jumping off point into what I know will resonate with all of us. And Penni, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Alan, thank you as well. It's a pleasure to be here today.
All right, so let me jump right into it on something that I've heard you say. You've said that not only are we enough, but we are more than enough. If this belief could be get hardwired into the mind of each of us, what a world changer that would be. So would you please elaborate on what you mean by that?
Absolutely. From when we're little kids, we actually start to learn things like not being good enough, competition. I call it the competition comparison game, not feeling worthy. And if we don't, throughout our adolescence, our teenage years, and our young adult years, learn a different way of thinking, we continue that through our adult years. And what if, as children, through mentors, through teachers, through other, students, and of course through our parents, we didn't learn, or we were able to realize how to handle the jealousies or the competition game or the I'm not good enough feelings to be able to be self-confident through those younger years. I know for myself and my own personal transformation, if I knew then what I know now, of course, and if I had the mentorship and guidance younger in my life, I just wonder what kind of world I could have helped to create and to build. So I think that that's something that we all can look at and learn from and try to create in our lives and try to change the mind shift as early in our life as possible to be more than enough, because we have what we all have in us, what it is that we need. We're given our God-given talents and our skills. What we don't always realize is we don't recognize them or we don't utilize them out of fear.
Well, the good news for all of us who are benefiting from your show and from your guidance and advice is that if you knew then what you know now, but you're not dying with your song in your heart, as Thoreau said. You have decided at a fairly young age, I might add, that you are going to help change the world. So that is something that you're to be congratulated for. It is true that so many of us really never realize our dreams because of these self-limiting beliefs, quite frankly, and we just never wake up to the fact that we are enough, or even if we do wake up to it, we never have the courage to jump into the deep water and start swimming. So we're all better off for the fact that you've chosen the path you've taken. You talk about these beliefs that tend to get wired in at an early age. I've heard once, and you probably have as well, that we never get out of high school. Have you heard that one?
I have, yes.
And you reflect back on your life. So take the person that I am today or you are today, and the experiences we had, both good and bad, during those very formative years. And it's certainly true in my life. I have certainly overcome some things and maybe gotten some things, gotten beyond some things, but there's still an awful lot there. So do you think that's an accurate statement, that it's in high school that we get most of the hardwiring and it sticks with us?
I do think that's true. I almost want to say, Alan, that I think that it can start sooner. One of the exercises that I've recently done in order overcoming my I'm not enough experience to becoming more than enough, and to gain my power and my transformation, and to really gain my self-confidence back when I was going through some difficult times recently, was I did an exercise, and one of the things that I recognized was I was not feeling good enough. I was feeling invisible. And what I did was I actually went back decade by decade. And when I went back decade by decade, I identified one or two major events that happened to me during that decade that made me feel not good enough. And obviously, there are things, sometimes you have to think about it. It doesn't necessarily pop into your head right away, especially if you're a little older like me and not in my 20s or 30s anymore. But I went back, into my 40s and into my 30s, and I was actually able to identify an event in my life that went all the way back to when I was 6 years old.
Oh.
And the idea of this exercise is to realize the very first time you experienced that feeling, whether it's I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or a jealousy feeling, or an anger or hurt. And if you can go back, the exercise helps you to go back and identify that very first experience that you had. And then what I did around that is I journaled. I realized, what was I feeling? What happened? Who was involved? And by identifying that, you can then, once you go back, then you want to go forward. So then once you've identified that, and what happened was my brother and I were playing outside, and I was 6 and my brother was probably about 3.5, and my brother got hurt. We were playing a game, and I ran into the house, and I went to get my mom to say, Mom, Ken's hurt. He needs help. And she looked at me and she said, what did you do? Why weren't you taking care of your brother? Go to your room. I'll deal with you later.
Yeah.
And at that moment in time, I interpreted that experience with my mom, not that she meant it in a harmful way, as that I wasn't good enough to take care of my brother.
Yeah.
So once I identified that as 6 years old, and this was, just an exercise I did recently, I then had to move forward again to identify those experiences that I had decade by decade, and how that was affecting my mindset and how that was affecting my life. And once I was able to do that, I was able to change how I viewed the experiences around that feeling of I'm not enough, and able to change my approach on how I was going to handle future situations. So I agree that it definitely affects us in our high school, and we definitely learn, but I almost want to say there are moments in time in our life that we may even have experienced and learned our behaviors even sooner than high school.
Well, an experience like that, I don't know whether that would classify as being traumatic in a clinical sense, but it certainly affected you because you were still carrying it up to recently. And medical science is saying today that these emotional toxins get stored up in our bodies. Our normal biological digestive process processes the food we eat and the liquids we drink, and it passes it out each day. These emotional toxins get stored up, and particularly if it's something that happened that long ago. And they say now that up to 95% of physical illness, including cancers, are caused by these emotional toxins that just sit there for years and years and years and ultimately take a toll. So journaling, which I think is what I heard you say, is a way of bringing them to the surface and helping you deal with it. And you said you were able to move forward, which sounds like you moved it out of your body. So that's good.
Absolutely. It's an amazing experience that once you identify it and you go through the process and you journal it, and whether you write it down or you share it verbally, as I've been doing with sharing my story, you're just able to release it out of your life, out of your mind, out of the way you handle it. And you're right. The stress that it creates in your body, and stress and inflammation are definitely, triggers to illness in our body. The stress that emotional experience creates does create health issues. I agree with you.
Right. So forgive the graphic example, but this could be called emotional constipation, couldn't it? And,
I like that. Yeah. You have a great way of putting it.
It doesn't require going to Walgreens or CVS to get X-Lax. You can just journal it, and that's the way you pass it out. So good.
Yeah, you can self-diagnose and self-medicate, but in a good way, in a positive way.
You're the guest, so I'm not going to belabor my own personal story, but it does remind me. You remember the famous bestseller, "I'm Okay, You're Okay," 20 or so years ago?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's another way of saying the same thing, that I'm enough. But I reflect back on why, at the age of 29, I had to step out and run for the U.S. Congress. It was, of course, I was idealistic and I believed it and I wanted to change the world and I had all those good ones, but I also needed to be stamped okay because of things that happened in high school and the very, very rough childhood, economic circumstances of my family and my brother, who was bipolar and later committed suicide. So I was carrying a lot of this, and there is no more dramatic way to get proved you're okay than to go out and run against somebody and have more voters say you're okay than they are. So
that's definitely right. It's definitely a nice pat in the back and confirmation, and that's okay. Affirmation and confirmation is not a bad thing. If people recognize your change and recognize that you're okay, and you can hear it and verbally, share that with someone, that's positive affirmation. I agree.
Very good. In thinking about your personal story, so you've really gone from doing well to doing good. It would be one way to put it, wouldn't it? So you were doing very well, and maybe you still are as a real estate investor, but you felt that doing well financially was not enough. Mm-hmm. I guess just like me, maybe you've allowed your personal story to motivate you to go help others. But tell a little bit about what motivated you to go from just making money to also wanting to change the world or do well for others.
Well, I think part of it is going through life and going through the decades of life. Obviously, we get a little older, we get more nostalgic. We feel like, we're getting closer to the end and, what have we done with our life? So, in the last 3 years, as wonderfully successful as I've been, and I enjoy the real estate world, and I'm grateful for all of that. I realized that through my personal journey and sharing my personal journey, like you had mentioned, Alan, and overcoming I'm not enough, it's not just about success and it's not just about money, as we all know. It's important to be whole and happy and healthy internally, to be able to love yourself, to love others. If you have faith, I'm Christian and I believe in God and spirituality. I think it's important to be well-rounded. And so what I've learned through my transformation is that I wanted to help other people find that wholeness within themselves so they could find their passion and they could live their best life and be their best selves and help their families, help their communities, and help the world. So I'm on a mission to touch 1 million lives.
Over the course of your lifetime or sooner than that?
Well, the sooner the better, but only God will know how quickly that happens.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I heard once, and it underlines what you said, that the wise man or wise woman keeps money in the head but never in the heart. So it's very important to manage your finances well, to achieve financial stability, because it gives you peace of mind. But to have your life become just about making money is going to wear you down sooner or later, and it often comes to not a very good end if that's what your life is all about.
Right. Well, and I think that, like you said, I think there's a money mindset out there that it's okay to have money. I think a lot of times we're taught it's not okay or it's bad or evil people have money or, right. And it's not, money in it of itself isn't good or bad. It just is money. It's how the person who's given the stewardship, who's given the responsibility to manage that money handles it. And so if you have abundance, then you should strategically and mindfully give abundantly. And not only financially, but give of your resources, give of yourself. For me, one of the things that I've realized over the last several years is that I have the gift of gab, and I have been blessed with the ability to be able to be a motivational speaker, a trainer, and to touch people, to call them to action. And I, for the last 10 years, to be very honest with you, was not using that God-given talent. And so when I decided, when I wanted to pivot from doing real estate to really helping people become and live their best lives, what were my skill sets? And the skill sets are really what I think helps you to find your purpose. And one of the things you had asked me a question I just wanted to mention, as far as finding and why is it that I want to help people. I think I have a message, and I say that your mess is your message, because we all have a mess and we all have a story to tell. So your mess is your message. Your message is your story. Your story is your purpose, and your purpose is your passion. And so through my story of figuring out I'm not a good enough, I found my purpose, and that's to help other people overcome I'm not good enough.
I've also heard that it's a little bit of a play on what you just said. There's a bless in every mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Before,
Yeah.
Okay, to talk a little bit about, since you've got your show, you're a speaker, what are some of the practical techniques that one could use in their own life? You mentioned journaling. Are there others that go along with that can help you pass out these toxins that you stored up all this time and deal with these self-limiting beliefs?
Absolutely. I went through personally a 10 modular program. I don't use all of the modulars or all the programs all the time now. But the few that I used to start off with and the few that I continue to, the 3 or 4 that I continue to, I'm happy to share. First off, one of the things, once I realized that I wasn't good enough, and I was in a pretty dark place. I was in what I call a situational fog. I was going through, unfortunately, I was going through a divorce. I had moved to a new place. I didn't have any friends, and I was restarting my real estate business. I was depressed. It was difficult for me just to get out of bed some days, take care of my little dogs, and do the things that I had to do. And one day I woke up and I said, enough. I need to take back my life. So what I started doing is I started putting down 5 things I was grateful for. And being grateful is an incredible tool in our lives to be able to use. It really is a mindset shift. Yes. And people don't realize it until you start doing it. But every day, from that moment when I woke up and I said, I'm taking back my life, to this day, which is almost 3 years later, I write down at least 5 things that I'm grateful for. Now, I will tell you, Alan, when I first started, when you're in a fog or you're depressed or you're in that downward spiral, it's hard to think of 5 things. So for me, it was, I have a roof over my head, I have food in my belly, I have the love of my 2 dogs and my family, and 2 other things that day that I could muster up to feel grateful for. And what I realized when I started doing this after several weeks is I started feeling better. I started thinking better. And when you think better, you do better. And when you do better, you think better. And so it was kind of that, positive mind shift. And then what I started doing in my gratitude journal is I started wanting to do things in my day that I was grateful for. And so that was another mind shift change. So number 1, I would recommend to any of your listeners and anyone who listens on the PenniZ Show, we recommend a gratitude journal. Start with 5 things you're grateful for every day. I will be honest, there's days right now that I have 10, 15, and 20 things that I'm grateful for on my day. The second thing that I actually did was I took back my health. You had mentioned, how stress and how our mindset affects our health. I was overweight. I was not eating well. I had aches and pains all over my body from probably the start of arthritis and also some sports injuries that I had when I was in high school. And I went on a program, the JJ Virgin program, and I took back my health. It was a lifestyle choice, not a diet. And what I realized is it gave me additional self-confidence. It helped me to lose weight. It helped me to feel better. I changed how I thought about my body, how I thought about taking care of it. I went back into an exercise program. So whether you need to do that or it's just something to help you with your self-confidence and getting into a regimen and a routine, I recommend getting on a health and exercise program.
Right.
The third thing that I had mentioned earlier that you brought up was a journaling. And the journaling that I did now is different than what I did when I first started. Now I journal, and I journal a lot more and a lot more in detail. When you're in a difficult situation, or when you're depressed or in a fog, as I call it, it's not always easy to journal. And again, you don't feel very good. I didn't want to journal. So what I did instead is I journaled around what I call the happiness button. And the button was on a scale of 1 to 10 for the day. This was at the end of the day, along with when I did my gratitudes journal. On a scale of 1 to 10, how happy was I today? Was I a 3? Was I a 5? Was I a 7? And all I had to do is 1 or 2 sentences was why. What in my day allowed me to feel that I was a 5 on the happiness journal. And so I didn't do books or paragraphs. It was very simple. It was on a scale of 1 to 10. How happy was I and why? And when you start journaling and you start looking at it over the course of a month and 2 months and 3 months, you do see the shift in your life and in your mindset. And you do want to start putting things down that you're grateful for, that you're happy for, that you're proud of. And you want to start doing and acting that way in your life and with the people in your life. So those are 3 of the things that I started right off the bat.
Well, it sounds like that, there are the so-called 6 pillars of well-being, which starts with sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Sleep. We're a sleep-deprived nation because of our bigger, better, faster, stronger ethos that's always run this country. Nutrition. We are second only to Mexico now in obesity on the whole planet. So stress eating is another way of coping.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Movement, which you mentioned, exercise of various kinds, which can be walking, running, yoga, whatever. Meditation, calming that monkey mind we're all afflicted with, which particularly when you're in a downward spiral like the one you described, that monkey is just driving you nuts. Jumping around, regrets about yesterday, worries about tomorrow. Did I cause this? Am I angry at the other person? Whatever that internal dialogue was. So meditation, mindfulness being another term for it, and then social networks. Loneliness is becoming a big issue, especially among young people and seniors. And then finally, grounding. Walking on the good Mother Earth, the grass underneath your feet, and sidewalk, and so forth. Anyway, so talk a little bit about. So you did mention the happiness button, so I want to ask you to elaborate on that. But people who call into your show, or the guests you have on, what kind of self-perceived inadequacies do they have when they say I'm not enough? Is it body image? Is it verbal abuse they've suffered in the past? A combination of those two. Kind of what do you run into?
It's interesting because I've had about 24 plus guests on the PenniZ Show, and we have not run into the same situation exactly yet, which I find very interesting because I thought that we would have the same topic. Now, everybody has the same feeling of I'm not enough or inadequacy, but the topics have been different. So I find that very fascinating. Now, the tools and techniques used are similar. Like you had mentioned, meditation. I do meditation. I have a morning routine every morning. I highly recommend. That's one of the 10-step programs. Loneliness you recommended. So yes, so when my guests come on, they talk about loneliness. They talk about the inadequacy of maybe being a middle child of 3. They talk about abuse. They talk about health issues, but not just health issues in the sense of, I'm overweight. I mean, there are people that have talked about their health issues and their eating disorder, but some have come on and talked about fibromyalgia and how working with the doctors and the inadequacy of trying to diagnose that affected their lives. Being a single parent, having challenges just being in a relationship, in a married relationship. We have run the gamut, actually, of all kinds of topics on our show, which I find wonderfully fascinating because it brings up the topic that you mentioned also about loneliness. I think one of the things that happens, and you're right, is we're becoming more and more lonely. We're becoming more and more isolated. And one of my goals through my show and connecting and sharing is that people not everybody will connect with every guest on my show, but somebody will connect with somebody on the show and have a similar story in a similar situation. And so hopefully they won't feel alone. We don't want people to feel alone. And, the other thing that we do encourage is when you are in a fog or when you are depressed or when you are feeling lonely, one of the steps or the tools that you can use is to help someone else. And it's a hard thing to do, and it's a hard thing to say. But once you start looking outside yourself, even if it's just going out to the grocery store in your day and paying someone a compliment, or just saying hi for someone, or how about just opening the door for someone at the bank or the grocery store or a school or a business. It's amazing how many times I walk up to a building with a door and someone walks in the door before me and just lets it slam right behind him and doesn't even recognize that someone's behind them. So there's things that we can do for ourselves, but for others to help with the loneliness and help connect.
Yes. Do you see any significant difference between men and women and the self-limiting beliefs that, particularly young girls during the social media age seem to be more overexposed to cyberbullying and body image issues and their self-esteem maybe than, and I know all generations as teenagers have these issues, but social media, of course, kind of puts it on steroids. You can body shame somebody or say something bad to someone anonymously on Twitter or something else. So do you see the difference between men and women and their self-limiting beliefs?
Yeah, I love the question. When I actually saw the question and thought about it, I really want to actually think about it more and almost talk about it more as well. There was a couple of questions that you had, Alan, that was very thought-provoking. I mean, I think that there's just basic difference because men and women are created genetically different in our thoughts and our process and our body makeup. And I think our society expects different things. I would say that my initial thought on your question was, I think my experience is in general, and unfortunately I'm stereotyping and I don't like to do that, but I think women are a little bit more, when it comes to working on themselves, they're more open to being open. They're more open to being vulnerable. They're more open to talking about their situations. And from my experience, and I again, I don't mean to put everybody in this box. It seems like they're more open to working on themselves and doing something about it. Now, with that said, I have had great men on my show, and you as well with your show, who have done personal transformation and working on themselves and talking about vulnerability. So I guess I would just say if I've seen anything without really going into research, and I love this question, so I'm going to look into it more, it would just be that women seem to be more open to conversation and to looking at themselves and working on themselves.
Well, I would agree with that. Did you read the book Men Are From Mars, Women From Venus?
I have. It's been a while, but yes, I have.
The book makes the same point. So in a marriage, for example, a wife starts talking to the husband about an issue. What the husband is hearing is, she wants me to fix this. And she may not want you to fix it at all. She just needs to talk to somebody about it. And a man, I think, if you want me to fix it, I will. If not, I don't want to hear about it. I'm busy. Whereas, and men tend to define themselves by, I am a lawyer, doctor, whatever I do, whereas women define themselves by their relationships, particularly their relationships with other women. So when a husband will hear a wife on the phone and talking for an hour to a girlfriend about what seems to him to be just totally inane stuff, and you think, get off the phone, what are you talking about? It's really an important bonding experience among the women, talking about themselves, talking about their lives, So it's really, and I know I've got a daughter, and she would call me up and start talking about things, and I said, well, get to the point. Finally, it occurred to me, when we start out this conversation, do you need just someone to listen, or do you need me to fix something? Tell me up. If it's listen, I will listen and I will not react. If you want me to fix it, tell me what you want me to fix. So it's important for men to, I think, understand where women are coming from on their need to bond and their need to talk to their relationships.
Absolutely. And I think for the transformation, one of the things, as you had mentioned, with social media and with our kids having so much that they have to deal with, which is very different than me growing up. I mean, yeah, we had bullying, but it was face to face, and you talked to the counselor and it went away, or there was a different way of handling it. It was a different world. We have similar circumstances, but I think it's so important in our society, in our world today, to start talking and opening up and having the conversations with our youth in school, in church groups, in youth groups. It's really important to give them a safe place, both for the men and the women and the girls and the boys, to be able to start talking and having those conversations, because they're just as vulnerable and they're starting to learn all of these experiences. And if we can get them when they're young, that's when you had initially asked me the question, how do we change the world, is when we make those changes when they're young, and we give them a safe, vulnerable place for them to open up and talk and have adults that are there to support them. Yes. I think that's so important, especially in bullying and cyberbullying and everything that we've got going on in our schools and things like that today.
Well, just to start kind of closing out here, the book that I wrote recently used the Wizard of Oz story to illustrate that it was really the story of our lives and was much more than a children's fantasy story. And if you remember, the central moral of the story was that we have within us everything we need. We do not have to find a wizard to fix this for us. And particularly the false wizards of pills and alcohol and binge eating and all the things that are killing people in record numbers. So on that optimistic note, I think from what I've read, that's really your regimen as well. It's within. You just have to go inside and do certain things in order to find it within. Would that be
absolutely? I agree. Sometimes we need mentors and coaches and people to help us recognize that and ask us questions to bring it out. But we have it within. You're absolutely correct.
Well, very good. Well, Penni, tell us how we can find your show, how we can find your website, and if we need to book a speaker, how we can find you to speak to our group.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alan. Again, it's been a pleasure. So if you'd like to follow us on our social media, obviously go to our website, www.thepennizshow.com. Penni is spelled Penni, the letter Z. So it's thepennizshow.com. You can also email us directly at zteam, Z as in zebra team, at thepennizshow.com. I do 30-minute free strategy sessions for people who would like to have a conversation around personal, professional growth and development. You can follow us on all of our Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and websites. And you also can book me for any of your speaking events through the Z team at PenniZShow.com.
All right, very good. Well, there's a wealth of information there. And I think, as all of you can see, Penni is full of practical wisdom and guidance and advice. Penni, thank you so much. And on that note, we will wrap up this session of Exiting the A.S.A.P. Lane and see you next show. Thank you.